Very good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
So should I start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So Vikram Chandra, an author and a linguistic gazelle, a virtuoso who knows exactly when to break rules and when to follow them. An author who never fails to give an astonishing and a frail touch to its characters, bringing them to life. His genius resides in the way he trusts his readers. From his first novel, Red Earth and the Pouring Rain, won the Commonwealth's Writing Prize for the best first book, and to his most iconic novel, The Sacred Games, which has also been adapted as a web television series by Netflix. The book was awarded the Hutch Crossword Award for English fiction and the Salon Book Award. Above all, Mr. Chandra is the recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship, and his work has been translated into 19 languages. Without further ado, let's meet the man behind it all. Now, sir, we'll interact with all of you for a while. And since he's such a famous person and he has so many fans, we have some questions prepared for him. So then we'll have a moderated question and answer session as well. We welcome you, sir.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Hi to all of you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Samika. I'm here to moderate the session. So, sir, first of all, is there anything that you would specifically like to talk about with us today?
Uh, no, not that I can think of right now. Maybe I will in a bit.
Okay, so then I'll just start by asking you some questions. So, first of all, sir, after Sacred Games, have you been working on anything new lately?
Yeah, I'm working on some new fiction. Um, but like many writers, I'm very superstitious about talking about ongoing work with outside of my except with my wife and one or two friends. And the reason for that is mostly it's so raw and unfinished that if I talk about it now, it might be completely different next year and different the year after that. So, but also it's just pure superstition, right? You don't want to get jinxed. But it's new fiction anyway.
So when you're writing a book, what does your process look like? Can you just tell us about a day in your life while you're writing?
Uh, so it depends on. I mean, my routine is very similar from day to day and project to project. I like to have a. It's like going to the office, right? So you can't treat it like you're waiting for inspiration or oh, I don't feel like writing today. Tomorrow I'll write. You have to set up a regular schedule for yourself as much as you can. So I like to write in the mornings. I like to write 400 words a day, which is actually not that much, right? It's a double space manuscript. It's a little over a page and a half. But I find that writing that much is quite exhausting for me. But I can maintain that pace day after day, month after month, year after year, right? And then one day, amazingly enough, you have a full book. So I often tell my students, it's not a sprint; it's like running a marathon, right? So if you try and do too much one day, then you might get too tired out. You'll sprain some writing muscle, which is not good, right? So a steady pace. And then it also depends on what part of the project I'm engaged in, meaning that early on, I have no idea what I'm writing, right? So when I started writing Sacred Games, um, Sartaj Singh actually appeared in a story in a book of short stories called Love and Longing in Bombay, which had come out before Sacred Games. So I had him, but the only thing I had at the beginning of writing Sacred Games was that there was this cop talking to a gangster named Gaitonde inside a weird bunker-like house in Bombay, but I had no idea who this gangster was, why he was there, and so forth. And then I just have to figure it out by exploring the story and the characters.
So just bouncing off what you said last, you said that all you had was that they were going to have a conversation in that bunker, but naturally, Sacred Games is the way we've seen it and we've read it is extremely detailed and nuanced. So, what was your process for research like, and what do you think was like? What do you think were the best sources while researching your novel?
So, I mean, I love doing research. Right? As you can see in my very messy office, right? There's lots of books, and I have Illustrated Weekly of India from the 1970s back there somewhere.
Mm.
So I'll read a lot of secondary sources, you could call them, right? Books, magazines, newspapers, academic papers. But then I also really like going into the field, as it were, and talking to people who are in the area that I'm talking about, in the general job or business or whatever. So, like I was saying, Sartaj has a story in Love and Longing in Bombay. And while writing that, I had met Hussain Zaidi, right,
Hmm.
who many of you will know, right? He's a journalist, incredible crime journalist and writer and publisher. Lots of his books have been made into movies. Uh, Most recently, Class of '84, right, which you might have seen on Netflix. So through him, when I started writing Sacred Games, I told him, like, just introduce me to anyone you can who can talk to me about, the criminal underworld, the political underworld, the religious world, any of the above, right? And so what I would do is my usual practice is when I'm talking to one person and having a conversation with them, I always say towards the end, can you introduce me to anybody else who you think can talk to me about this stuff? And so you form a kind of network of sources, right? And so with Hussein being my guide, he led me through a lot of this. And people get often most excited. They want to know, did you talk to so and so cop? How many gangsters did you talk to? So
Oh.
that seems like very exciting and dramatic, but you get equally valuable stuff by talking to somebody who's lost, who's been killed by a company, somebody whose business has been turned upside down, right? So you have to gather information about the entire world in which all these people move in.
So that sounds extremely in-depth. We have some questions coming from the people we have watching. So the attendees ask, have you ever faced writer's block and how did you deal with that?
Touchwood, I have never gotten the really bad writer's block, right? The kind that is really paralyzing and I'm again, it's something that all writers are really superstitious about, because that can turn into an awful problem. But what does happen to me is that while I'm writing, I'll reach a certain point at which I don't know what's going to happen in the story yet, right? And I
Yeah.
can't see a way forward to finding it, right? And so what I then do is I just give myself a holiday. I'll say, like, a holiday with a very close, very specifically set period, right? So I'll say for the next 2 weeks, the next 14 days, I'm not going to work on the book, and I will not try not to think about writing at all, right? And then I go off and watch movies and listen to music and read stuff, um, and then amazingly enough, at some point, the solution will suddenly pop into my head, right? And that can be very frustrating, right? You spend like a month waiting for something to happen. When the solution comes, it seems so simple, right? It was like, feel like it was right there under my nose for the last 30 days while I was getting anxious. And why didn't I get it? But I think so I should say, and this is, I think, a lot of writers and other kinds of artists working in other fields, they'll tell you that writing happens a very large amount in the subconscious or the unconscious, right? Where did Gaitonde appear from, right? I have no idea, right? So
Yeah.
he just like came like a demon into my head one day, right? So what happens is during those pauses, during that month or 2 weeks of holiday, your entire body, your entire subconscious is working on the problem, right? And then somehow in that chemistry that you're not quite aware of, the solution comes. And this happens, I should say, in a lot of other fields as well, right? It's not only writers. You'll hear about mathematicians talking about this kind of stuff, scientists, right? They're looking for a way to solve something. Those of you who are programmers will have encountered this, right? You get stuck, you have a problem, you don't know how to design that part of the program, you walk away from it for a couple of days, and then you get it, right? Find a way to do it. So I would say, like, this is general advice for everyone listening. If there's some tricky kind of puzzle that you're trying to solve, sometimes walking away from it actually helps a lot.
So in line with this question, we have more questions that people are asking with respect to tips for budding writers. So not just writer's block, but so earlier you told us that your routine is writing the same amount every day and treating it like a marathon. But so do you have any more advice with respect to how to get into that flow or with respect to how you think writing changes, or like what that practice instills in a person, or like how it changed you?
Right. So, I mean, I think the other most important thing is read, right? Read a lot, and then read like a writer, right? Not just a kind of person who's looking at reading only for pleasure or, even instruction or whatever. And what I mean by reading as a writer is that if you read something that is really compelling for you, yeah, you start reading a book and then you emerge from it 3 days later, feeling like you've entered another world and you disappeared into that world, and it stays with you and you want to read it again and again, then read it again and again, right? And you know, on those repeated readings, try and work out what is the craft through which that writer made you feel this way, right? How did they affect these changes within your internal chemistry, right? So it's like kind of like trying to do a reverse engineering, right? So you're taking the book and then you're trying to figure out its structure, right from the like the broadest kind of structure, right? How the chapters are arranged, then to what the story that is told in each chapter, right? Where is the arc of tension? What is the conflict through the entire book and then through that chapter, right? And so by trying to see the design, you start to learn from it. And then you can apply that design in your own work, right? And this goes down, like I was saying, to the very sentence, right? If you think a sentence is really beautiful, then you have to try and figure out like what is it about the rhythm of that sentence that makes it work, right? And so some of you must have taken writing workshops. This is exactly what we do, right? In every workshop that I teach, we read together, publish stories, and we read each other's work, right? And then we try and do this analytical approach. We first talk about the emotions, right? This is why I love this story, and then we try and talk about what is it about the story that made us love it, right? And so this is also, I would say, it's a lifetime practice. You can't just do it at the beginning and think you've learned everything and then give it up. It's like kind of riyaz, right? Like
Mm.
it's like a daily practice that you do. And like artists in other fields, like really also great artists, you see them do this practice, right? Every day. You can't you can't suddenly take a rest, right? And go off and think, oh, I've learned everything.
Yeah. So someone asks, while writing a book, did you ever feel that it might not turn out good, or like feel worried about something that you're writing?
Every day. Every day you face this. I don't care how experienced a writer you are, if you've published 20 books, if you won many awards, when you face the blank page or the blank computer screen every morning, you still have that crisis of confidence, right? You feel like, okay, do I have it in me to write one more good sentence, right? And then the thought of writing another good chapter is very far away at that point. uh, and then I take an excessively long time to write books, right? So Sacred Games, I think, took me about 9-10 years to finish, from the point
That's
that I started writing the first page to when it appeared in the market, right, and was available on bookstores. So a lot of times during that period, you are working, you don't know if the book has found a shape yet. You constantly are asking, can I finish this? If I finish it, will it be any good, right? And you have to go forward on hope, right? There's nothing else. I think the only thing that you get after publishing a first novel is that you have the reassurance that you can do it again. I've done it once, I can do it again, right? So even in short stories, if you finish one short story, that means you can write a second one and a 10th one and a 20th one, right? But the important task is to finish, is to go cross that finishing line. And so what is also really important to remember is that your first draft is always going to be really bad. My first drafts are horrible, right? And then maybe the first 20 drafts are not that good. The 30th draft, it starts to look decent. And any book or story that you read that you think is really beautiful, you have to believe that there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the making of that book, right? So yeah, it's a tough business, right? Like I guess any other job, but it's also, I guess it's unique perhaps in that it's a very solitary profession, right? I spent my days inside this room, right? Writing and reading and working. And then, so, in the evenings, I'm desperate to get out of here, right? Because it's been an entire day all by myself. Although I'm an introvert. So, I mean, I'm not averse to being alone, but being alone that much is pretty harrowing sometimes.
So I think everyone in lockdown has had that feeling of being
Yeah,
stuck.
yeah, yes. Now, yes, I mean, when the lockdown first started, a lot on social media, I saw a lot of writers saying, I've been training my whole life for this. So, let's see, let's see if I can weather it. Although I think even among my friends, the sense now is it's gone on way too long, right? And people want to get out.
Yeah. So coming to Sacred Games and say its Netflix adaptation, my first question with respect to that is what was one aspect that was either changed or missing? Because we know that your book is an extremely detailed description. Do you
Hmm.
think, did you ever fear that they'd cut down your vision when it was going to be adapted?
Well, so I should first say that, I told them right at the beginning, do what you want with it, right? So I worked in film a little bit on the other side of the fence, right? So some of you know uh, I was one of the writers on Mission Kashmir, one of Ritik's early movies. And my entire family, my sisters are Anupma Chopra
Yeah.
and Tanuja Chandra. So Tanu is a director. Anu has that film companion channel, and Anu is married to Vidhu Vinod Chopra. So I worked with him also in several movies. So what I understood from all that experience is that it's a very different craft and medium than fiction, right? It's entirely different, and you're playing with different elements, right? It's all about depth of field and the distance of the shot and rhythm and music and all of that. So in order to do a successful translation from one medium to another, you have to make radical changes, right? So I knew this. So I told them, okay, you guys go ahead with whatever you want to do. And I was attached to the project as an executive producer. So what I would do is they would send me drafts of the seasons, the episodes, and then I would give them notes, and then we would have a conversation back and forth. But they were completely free to ignore my suggestions, right, or take whatever they said. And I think they ended up doing an incredible job, right, of translating it to the screen. And of course, there were whole huge chunks of the book that get left out, right? And some of the characters, like some of you know this, Cuckoo she doesn't even appear in a scene in the book, right? The Kartikar and Sartaj are on a stakeout, and they're waiting for some bad guys they want to capture, and then they just start talking. And Kartikar tells the story of Cuckoo and like in 2 pages, right? And somehow they all got together in that writer's room in Bombay, and they figured out that this character, they should take her and make her into a much more important one, right? Um, and then also, I mean, I think it's inevitable always uh, with these kind of things, when you change from one medium to another, there were parts that I felt should have been left in, and they couldn't keep them in, right? Uh, so Parulkar in the book is a different kind of character. In the book, actually, Sartaj is not a clean cop, right? He's not honest and upstanding. He takes bribes, right? But he tries to do the best in a very dirty environment, right? So
Yeah.
that was one of the changes they made. One thing that we all of us wanted to keep, that there is an entire story of that boy who kills Kartikar, right, which is
Yeah.
in the book. And they kept writing him in, and then they realized that there's not enough time in 8 episodes or even 16 episodes of 2 seasons to have all the stories, right, that you want to put in. In the book, Sartaj's aunt, right, the one who gets left behind in during partition, she gets a lot more focus, right, and that they had to fight to keep in, right, again because of time, right, and they had to like only do one scene, one sequence with her, right, but you can't avoid all this, right.
So you said you worked in film. So, for example, you're talking about now the limitations of time that happen with respect to, say, film and TV. So do you think that that's one of the, like, would that stop you from focusing more on film later on in your career? Or do you think that if you wanted to make a shift, that wouldn't be a problem?
No, I went to film school after I finished my BA, right? I always knew I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, and I'd been writing. My first short science fiction short story was published in my school magazine when I was in sixth, right? And after that, I was like, oh, this is amazing. The older senior boys were coming up to me and telling me, we liked your story. So I thought this is an excellent way to live within the environment of the school, right? Because I was this little kid with very nerdy, with thick glasses. I'm wearing contacts right now, right? So, so as a nerd, I had to find a way to fit in, right? And this was good. But so I went through college. I for my BA thesis, I wrote a honors thesis. I wrote a novella. But then the idea of trying to make a living as a fiction writer just seemed insane, right? It seemed like completely undoable. And since my family was now around the film industry, and I've always loved cinema, I always felt like I could get a job in the film industry because it is an industry, right? You can get a job as a junior assistant to an assistant or something like that. So I went to film school and then quickly figured out that film is not for me. It's an industrial art, right? You need 60, 100 people on the set. Uh, being, like I said, I'm an introvert. I like being alone. So I just figured out like, no, this is not the area for me. But I like working at a kind of distance from it, right? So my sisters and Vidhu and I sometimes talk about projects they're doing, and I try and help them. But I I have worked on some projects, but never in a kind of central way, right?
So if you were ever given the chance to say rewrite a novel or like that already exists, or if you were given the chance to say adapt a movie to a novel, what would you choose and why?
Neither, right? Because yeah, no, I don't think either, because both of those require working on work that's already done in a sense. And I know some people love doing that kind of thing, but I don't think I could do it. Uh, because even, rewriting your own stuff, or since Sacred Games was published, I don't think I've read the entire book even once. Right? Because once you're done with a project, it feels like you're finished with it, right? You don't want to spend time in that world anymore. You just want to move on and start exploring something new, because I always say this, that for writers, curiosity is the most valuable resource, right? Or one of the most valuable resources. So if you're driven by curiosity towards something, then I think it's fruitful. Otherwise, it can get pretty deadly.
So speaking of like things that you are very curious about, is there anything recently that's completely taken up your fascination?
Oh, so I guess this is one thing that we haven't talked about. So for a long time, I've been really dissatisfied with the state of writing tools, writing software. So I actually ended up co-founding a company called Granthika. So we are making software for writers to make writers' lives easier. So you guys should check it out if you're interested, if you're would-be writers. Just go to granthika.co and you'll see what we're doing. So I'm a kind of hacky programmer. I worked my way through my writing my first novel by working as a independent programmer consultant. Uh, so my last book was about, weirdly enough, about the cultural world of programmers, and pre-modern Indian aesthetics, right? Sanskrit poetry, Sanskrit linguistics, like Panini
Yeah.
and his work, and trying to see, like, find connections between these worlds, as they exist. So I've always been fascinated by language, by the nature of language, poetic language, computer language, coding languages. So and then that turned itself into this software thing. So I've been learning a lot about. I caught the last few minutes of Kamal Rekhi's talk,
Yeah.
right? And so I've always been fascinated with the world of Silicon Valley, and I live in Oakland, just near Silicon Valley. So it's very much a part of the everyday milieu here. So I've been learning about that a lot. while I'm writing on this fiction, which has nothing to do with this part, right? Uh, so you end up having a lot of diverse interests, I think.
So you've talked about the inspiration behind your programming. You say that it was because you were dissatisfied with, say, existing software. But what was the process by which you set up this new software?
Oh, so again, it's driven by curiosity, right? So when I found out that there were no good tools for writers, I felt like there were no good tools. I wondered why um, this was so, right? Like it seemed like such an obvious kind of market to reach for. So I started looking into it, and again, this took me like 10 years. And it turns out that uh, attaching knowledge to text, right? So
Yeah.
basically, the idea of, it's not just words on a page. You can actually tell our software that the word, Samika, that name refers to an actual person,
Yeah.
right? And then the location, when you write Mumbai, it knows that you're talking about the city called Bombay, right? And making that happen is actually a very tough problem. So I spent a long time, like I was saying, 10 years trying to figure out how to do it. Then I had a very high level idea of how to do it. Then, because I'm here, I have a friend, Akash Kapoor, who lives in India. He's another writer, but he's also a writer slash techie.
Yeah.
So he introduced me to a VC firm in San Francisco, and we ended up getting a small amount of money from them. I found my co-founder. So it was a long journey, right? And again, it's been very tough because as anybody will tell you, the startup world is as hard as they tell you, and 10 times harder, right? Um, so it's been, yeah, it's been fascinating and fun and exhausting in the same moments.
So somebody has put it in the chat. Could you recommend any piece of fiction? I mean, I'm sure that you've been reading a lot more this past year.
Oh, okay. Let me think. Oh, actually, I just saw um, that I think it's the 50th anniversary or something like that of Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children being
Oh,
published.
yeah.
And you should absolutely read Salman's work, right? But start with the Midnight's Children.
Yeah,
Um,
he's a wonderful author.
yeah.
So any other books? I think,
Okay. So everyone should read Premchand,
yeah,
right? And you should read Premchand in Hindi if you can. Otherwise, try and find him in translation. Read Manto, right? And I'm sure some of you have read Manto's short stories, but I should also tell you that he was a part of the film industry prior to partition. He was a writer, and he knew all that generation of film folks. So he wrote a book. There's a collection of his writings about the movie industry called Stars from Another Sky. That's the translation into English. So you should read that as well. Uh, in American writers, one of my favorite books is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. You should read that. I mean, I could go on, right, all day. But yeah, those are a few of my like sort of standard things that I've loved over my life.
so coming back to Sacred Games and to the Netflix show, is there any episode that you particularly enjoyed? And if you did, what made you enjoy it so much?
Well, I think the first one, right? I mean, I think it was really great, episode one of season one. But also, when before it was actually released on Netflix, for general sort of the audience, the global audience, Netflix had organized this big premiere in Bombay.
Yeah.
And so all of us were there. Some of the Netflix execs flew down from LA and New York. But that was the first time that any of us had a sense of what the audience reaction would be, right? So it was done in a multiplex in Bombay. My family was all there, my parents and my sisters, my friends were there. Uh, and then sitting in that darkened theater for the first time, seeing what I had imagined like decade before, that was amazing, right? And then once you had the sense in that theater, hearing the people react, and then after it coming out into the lobby and hearing what they have to say, that was very exciting, right? So I think it's an excellent episode on its own, but in my head, what all these emotions that are connected to it are also really strong.
So while writing, is there any particular type of character or type of scene that you write that you feel is more difficult than any other type? Like, for example, fight scenes or...
No, they're all equally difficult, I think, at least to me, right? Um, and in some sense, now that you said fight, action scenes are difficult in one way, in that you have to make the audience feel the impact, but they're easier in another way, that at least during that time you have less, or many times in action scenes you have a less emotion to depict, right? Because the emotion can come after, right?
Yeah.
And so getting into the head of the character or the body of the characters and making the audience feel that is one of the things that is hardest about writing anything, right? But especially hard in fiction and poetry. So you have to work a lot on that.
Right. So, my next question is out of all of the novels that you've written and like your collection of short stories, which one was the easiest to write, did you find, and which one was the most difficult to write?
All are equally hard. I know I keep saying this, but each one while you're writing it feels like the hardest, right?
Right.
I guess in one way, writing the short stories was hard for me because my natural length is long, right? So I tend to write big books. My first book, Red Earth and Pouring Rain, was, can't remember, but 500 pages or so. So after that was finished, I thought I should kind of use other writing muscles. So I decided to write short stories. But writing compact short stuff is insanely hard for me. And the short stories kept getting longer, right? That
Yeah.
Sartaj Singh story actually is more novella length than it is a short story. And people who write poetry, I can't imagine how they do it, right? How do you get so much emotion into 6 lines? It's incredible. For me, it's incredible. And I think to them, I've had friends say this, I can't imagine, I don't understand how you can write a 500-page novel. And because it's something that comes to me, I think they're nuts, right? I don't understand what they're complaining about.
So Shreya asks, what is the book that is directly behind you?
This one?
If you're okay with sharing. I hope that it's that
Yeah.
one, but
Shreya, is it this one? It's Best American Short Stories.
uh,
This one is 2020. So there's a couple of collections that come out like this every year. Best American Short Stories. There's another, and what they do is this one is edited by a very good writer named Curtis Sittenfeld, right? So every year they get a different writer to judge a bunch of stories and put them in this book called Best American Short Stories. So it's a these kinds of books are very exciting to buy because you get to read a very diverse selection of stories and things that you might not come to on your own, right? So I'm always reading anthologies like this, right? And I think also, I guess if you're interested in short stories, it doesn't have to be like from 2020 or this year, right? There are lots of collections of things with titles like the best 100 short stories of all time and stuff like that. So it's a good idea to read those as well. Although always remember that it's some person's or one jury's judgment of what is best. So it's not a kind of all-time objective judgment in any sense, right? I mean, this one we are using in the one of the classes I'm teaching this semester, and sometimes we'll sit there and think, why did Sittenfeld think that this was a great story? Because none of us understand why it's so great, right? But that's also fun, right? To think about why somebody else loved something and you didn't like it that much.
so Sakshi asks, who is your favorite character in Sacred Games?
uh, it's hard to say. I mean, I think I like Kartikar a lot. I actually like Zoya Mirza quite a lot, right? And in the book, she's pretty much the last woman standing, right?
Right.
Everybody else has gone down one way or the other. Uh, I don't know. I mean, Gaitonde was pretty much, I think, probably, if I'm not probably, I know he was very hard to write because I had to get inside this man's head and write in first person, right? And he's a very, very bad man, right? so, so to be in his head for 10 years and to be thinking about violence and murder and corruption every day, it takes a toll on you, right? Like it can get a little hairy, right, for you as the writer. Uh, I mean, it's one of the risks of being a writer. There's a guy called Frederick Bush who wrote a book about the writing life, and his title for it was "A Dangerous Profession," right? Because you sort of enter these heads of these people who might not be people that in real life you might not want to be very close to them, but you have to kind of imagine your way into their heads. Uh,
So speaking of it being a very heavy and dark profession, what are your coping mechanisms for when it starts to get to you?
Oh, I think, I think, and this is like sounds so cliched and ordinary, but your family and friends are a great resource, right? So get out of your head, when you're not writing. It can become very hard because also writers tend to be obsessive, like me. But try and distract yourself, right? Try and relax every day. Take holidays, give yourself time off. Oh, and then physically, I think you have to take care of yourself. I guess that's true of everyone, but exercise, exercise. uh,
So
yeah, so I
what's your
guess that's.
favorite form of exercise?
Oh,
Like what?
I'm such a bad. I preach this all the time. I don't practice it very well. We have one of those elliptical machines.
Yeah.
So we use that. Some sort of like light weights. Walking, I go for a walk every day, right? And with my kids, and our dog. And so walking, I think, is a great thing, right? And also because you know even when you're not feeling that great, you can walk. Walking is available to you everywhere, right? uh, um, so yeah, so I think any form of anything that gets you out of your chair and gets you moving.
So one question I have for you is that obviously while you were writing Sacred Games, you had a certain picture of what characters would look like. So how in line with your imagination was the casting of the show?
I thought it was great. I mean, especially with the Nawazuddin as Gaitonde. As soon as I found out that he was going to play the part. I could completely see him in the part. Right, that was great. Um, I can't think of anybody in the series that I thought wouldn't kind of look like how I'd imagine them. Um, Parulkar actually in the book he's described as pear shaped, right? So he's overweight and his uniform is always crumpled, right? So they changed that quite a bit. So when I first read the first draft, and then when I saw the actor on the screen, that was, I guess, yeah, that I felt like, oh, this guy's not like how I imagined it. But once you start watching, he completely takes over the part, right, and makes it live. So,
So I'll just somebody has asked you to repeat the name of your startup.
oh, it's Granthika, Granthika, and the website is at granthika.co.
So what is the inspiration behind the name, if I can ask?
Oh yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. So there's a whole sort of Sanskrit etymology behind this. So Granth um, is means first it means not, and then from that the root Granth, then you get Grantha, right?
Hmm.
And Grantha is a series of knots, an arrangement or a sequence, right? That's why you get book as Grantha, right? And then Granthika becomes narrator, right? Literally, one of the meanings that they give is one who understands the joints and divisions of time, right? So you can see how that fits with narrator, right? So since
That's
it's software for writers, Granthika narrator makes sense.
so is English the only language you write in, or do you like to write in any other languages?
No, I write in English only. But like I was saying, I've worked in movies in Bombay, so we worked on Hindi movies. But um, Hindi was my mother tongue. That's what we spoke at home, and
Mm.
I only learned English formally once I started going to school from the first onwards. But like I said, I started writing when I was fairly young. And so by the time I was 11, 12, and I started to write, I somehow naturally fell into English as a means of expression. Um, and I think now it's become such an Indian language as well, right? It's everywhere across the country, across the subcontinent, actually. And we've made it local, right? We've all localized it, right? So there's not only English, but there's Tinglish and, Malayalam English and all of that. So one of the great fun things, and I made an effort, conscious effort to do this, was to tell in the book to use the language that I would use if I was sitting in a bar in Bombay and telling one of those stories to a friend of mine. I would naturally be going between Hindi and English and, sprinklings of gangland slang. So that was the language I wanted to use on paper, right? And I was telling you, you should read Salman's Midnight's Children, and you see what fun he has, right, with the
Yeah.
rhythms and the sort of local slang and Hindi words and so forth. So and we all in India, we always have lived in a multilingual universe, right? So it's not just in modern times that we have English and you know Hindi, and perhaps if you're um, from Maharashtra, you might speak Marathi at home, right? That has always been the case, right? So immediately before English, it was Farsi, right? That was the kind of connecting subcontinental language, one of them, and then before that, it was Sanskrit, right? So in the old classical days, you would speak Sanskrit if you were from a certain class and perhaps caste, in a kind of way to communicate with everyone across the length of the continent. And then maybe you would speak Prakrit at home, right? Magadhi or something like that. And then there would be a local dialect you would speak, right? So exactly like we have now. And that's why, I mean, when I have American friends, for instance, visit India, I'll tell them that some of my friends speak 5 languages.
Yeah.
They're baffled, right? They say, how can that be? But we naturally, depending on where you live in the country and where you're from, we grow up in this world, right? So writers, even if you write, say, in Hindi, you have to represent a world in which people sprinkle in English and Marathi, right? So
Yeah.
you all end up doing this kind of khichdi thing, right? To some extent or another, right? Unless you're being very shuddh and you're only trying to use, but I don't
Right.
think that's very true to the actual reality on the streets. Yeah.
Uh, so speaking of you living in America, what impact do you like? What do you think you miss most about home?
Well, I mean, family and friends, of course, right? Um, but also like I'm particularly, Bombay is home and has been home for decades now. So I miss the city,
Yeah.
right? I miss the streets and the smells, as bad as they are quite often, you know, the whole energy of the place. And like other places in India, it's actually is a very also exhausting and cruel place to live, right? Uh, but all of that together is somehow unique. So I love going back there. I haven't been, because of this lockdown for much longer than I would like. So I'm going to head there fairly soon, right? Depending on what the conditions are. Um, so all of that, right? And I don't want to romanticize it at all, right? I mean, as you know, there's lots to love about India, and there's lots of things that should be a lot better, right? Um, so, but it's home, right? And you always want to go home.
So speaking of Bombay being your home, it's also one of the major settings for Sacred Games. So could you just tell us a little bit about what is like one of your favorite spots in the city?
Well, I think it depends on what I'm doing. Uh, there's all the kind of cliched things that people talk about, right? Like, but they are beautiful, Marine Drive and so forth. Uh, the sites that people usually talk about. I guess for me, I don't know. I mean, offhand, I can't think of any particular place. Oh, I like the food in Bombay, right? I'm not a great foodie, but I like going to restaurants in Bombay, right? Because
Yeah.
there you get a real cross section of places, right? So like down in the fort area, you have all those seafood restaurants, right? Then you have the street food. Then you have the very high-end expensive places, right? So each place that you go to, you can do, I love people watching, right? And so you can do people watching at all these places. Um, uh, you know, all this gully food also, there's particular spots that Bombay people will know, right? That in episode one, in what is that guy's name that Gaitonde goes to, who cuts kanda very fast? That uh, it also repeats itself. I can't remember the name of the guy, but there's that when Sartaj is chasing him and he tells him to meet him somewhere, right? Or they think they found the phone signal, right? So that kind of local place, my Hussein and I often do this. We have a favorite Faluda places as well, and so we like to go there.
So before we close the session off, is there any last words or last bits of advice that you'd like to give everyone here?
Well, I think I often feel like when I'm doing these things, I feel like I'm giving one bhashan. I feel very odd advising people about how to live their lives, right? Because lives are very individual. Um, so I guess I've already talked about, I guess in terms of writing, like I said, read a lot and read like a writer. Read for pleasure, then read for analytically, and try and figure out what is it about the book that's working. And the same, right? If any of you are interested in filmmaking, right, you'll see that um, good filmmakers like watch enormous amounts of movies, right?
Yeah.
So some of you must have seen Anurag Kashyap's, he likes taking picture in front of his collections of his CDs, his DVDs, right? So people tend to be obsessive, right? My sister and my everyone I know in the film industry, the good directors and actors, they watch films obsessively, right? Trying to get an understanding of what makes good films, right? Uh, uh, what else? I don't know. What other, what other advice can I give you? I don't feel like I'm qualified to advise. Oh, another thing. I mean, whatever domain or whatever job or industry that you're in, um, like I was saying, curiosity is an incredible resource, right? If anything ever intrigues you, sticks in your head, you want to learn about it, uh, you know, that should lead you somewhere very productive, right? And then try and keep learning all the time, right? Like a day on which I've learned two or three things that I didn't know yesterday, that feels like a great day, right? Even if it's tiny, right? Even if it's very small. I mean, we have kids who are 10 and 12, and every day they tell me about some music that they're listening to. I have no idea who the musician is. Then I go and after they're asleep, I go and check it out on the web, right?
Yeah.
Even that kind of stuff, right, is it seems useless, right? But it's not actually useless because you're learning new stuff about the world.
Uh, so I'd like to extend a huge thank you from all of the people who've attended and also from the Business Conclave organizing committee. You've given us insights not only on writing, but on startups, on your life, both before Sacred Games and after. And it's been I'm extremely grateful that I got the chance to talk to you, and I'd like to just extend the biggest thanks possible.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me on, and I guess it's day there, so have a great day.
Thank you, sir. I hope you have a good night.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Thank you, sir.